Okay, let's unpack this. You've likely heard someone speak English with that effortless flow, right? That rhythm and natural tone that just immediately clicks.
Mm-hmm.
It's often described as sounding native-like. And for so many, learning the language, it feels like, well, the ultimate goal. But how do you actually get there?
That's a fantastic question, and one often met with the assumption that you need years, living immersed in an English-speaking environment.
Right, that you have to move abroad.
Exactly. But the source material we're exploring in this deep dive, it's this really interesting outline for a guide on learning from native speakers. It challenges that idea directly. It suggests you can develop that natural sound through specific targeted techniques, basically no matter where you are.
And that's really the core mission for us today, isn't it?
Mhm.
To delve into the specific guide's approach. It's like a blueprint, suggesting the key isn't just massive exposure, but smart practice focused on how native speakers actually talk.
Absolutely. This guide, or this outline, really, it breaks it down into actionable steps and some crucial insights. So we're going to systematically explore its core components. We'll start with a specific way of listening,
Okay.
then move into an active copying technique they recommend, talk about building truly natural vocabulary, highlight some common traps learners fall into.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, and finally, look at the cultural and subtle linguistic features the source emphasizes. It covers quite a bit of ground.
Sounds comprehensive. So let's dive right into that foundation then, the very first step this guide lays out. It makes it clear the journey begins not just with hearing words, but with a much deeper kind of listening.
Precisely. The guide's primary instruction is about shifting your focus. So moving from what is being said to how it's being said. It really urges you to become a keen observer of native speech.
An observer, I like that.
Yeah, it means paying close attention to the musicality of the language, the tone, the rhythm, and critically how words connect within sentences.
Ah, connected speech. The source brings that up specifically, right? That's where a lot of that native sound comes from.
It is. It's basically the opposite of pronouncing each word distinctly, like you're reading off a list. Native speakers, well, we naturally blend words together in a continuous stream of sound.
Okay, can you give us an example from the source? How does it illustrate this blending?
Sure. The guide points to common everyday phrases. Take, what are you doing? Now, for a learner, pronouncing each word separately, what are you doing, feels correct based on the spelling.
Makes sense.
But the source correctly identifies that in natural, often rapid speech, this frequently becomes something that sounds much closer to what you doing.
Up to doing. Okay, let's really break that down, like the source suggests. The T sound at the end of what? It often changes, doesn't it?
It does. It can become a quick flap sound, almost like a D, or it might sort of merge with the following R and U, and the vowels in R and U. They often reduce, they almost shrink or disappear.
Right, they get swallowed up a bit.
Exactly. And that ing ending on doing, it's frequently pronounced with just a simpler in sound, like doin'. So it's this cascade of tiny changes, like you said.
It really transforms the phrase. Does the source give another example?
Yes, it provides another perfect illustration with, I don't know. Spoken naturally, this rarely sounds like four separate, distinct words.
Yeah, you almost never hear, I don't know.
Right. It frequently reduces and blends into something that sounds much more like, I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, same thing happening there. The don't and no link up. That final T in don't often gets dropped or becomes a very quick glottal stop sound.
And the vowel in don't might reduce, become shorter or weaker. The vowel in no might also shorten a bit. The guide really highlights that this specific phenomenon is what gives native speech that perceived faster and smoother quality.
So it's not really about talking faster overall.
Not necessarily about articulating each sound quicker. It's more about eliminating those tiny pauses and the distinct boundaries between words. It's about the flow.
Okay, and why does the guide say you have to focus on observing this first? Why not just jump into practicing?
Well, the guide is very clear on this. If you can't actually hear these connections and reductions accurately, you can't really hope to replicate them effectively. It's about training your ear first.
Wow.
Training your ear to recognize the actual sounds of spoken English in real time, not just the sort of idealized pronunciation of individual words you might see in a dictionary.
So where should people listen for this?
The source advises using things like movies, podcasts, Real conversations if you have access to them as your training ground. But the key is listening specifically for how the words flow together. How do sounds change at the boundaries between words? This active, focused listening, that's the foundational skill before you even try to produce the sounds yourself.
Got it. So hone the listening. Spot the connected speech patterns. Then what? The guide introduces an active technique, right? Something called shadowing.
Yes, exactly. The source describes shadowing as deceptively simple, but actually incredibly effective. At its core, it's all about direct mimicry, pure imitation.
Okay, how does it work? Walk us through the steps as the source outlines them.
All right, so first step, you choose a short piece of audio, and the source suggests keeping it brief initially, maybe just a sentence or two. Could be from a TV show, a podcast clip, a YouTube video, basically any source of natural native speech. The key is short and manageable to start.
Okay, find a short clip. Got it. What's next?
Step 2 is all about focused repetition. So you listen to that short segment, let's say it's just one sentence. Then you pause the audio immediately.
Pause it.
Yep. And your task right then is to repeat that sentence back, trying your best to copy everything about it as precisely as possible. And the source really stresses this isn't just about getting the words right.
It's more than the words.
Much more. You're aiming to match the pronunciation, obviously, but also the speed, the rhythm, the intonation, the ups and downs of the voice, and even the emotion or the tone the original speaker used. It's like trying to become an audio clone for that brief moment.
Wow. Okay, so listen, pause, replicate everything, and then there's a third step.
There is. The third step takes it a bit further. You play the audio segment again, but this time you speak at the same time as the original speaker.
Like talking over them.
Kind of, but more like following along closely. The source describes this really well, actually, as being like your voice trails just slightly behind, or maybe you try to perfectly align with the original voice. You are simultaneously listening and speaking, constantly adjusting your own production based on the live input you're hearing.
That sounds challenging, but potentially really effective. The guide uses that famous example from Friends, doesn't it? Ross yelling, "We were on a break."
It's a perfect example, so vivid. The source points out how you'd listen to that line, delivered with all its, frustration and emphasis. Then you'd pause and you'd try to repeat it, aiming to inject that same pitch, that same stress on the word break, that same volume and speed. Really try to capture the feeling.
Okay.
Then, after practicing that paused repetition a few times maybe, you'd play the clip again and try to actually say, "We were on a break," along with Ross, attempting to match his sound profile exactly as you hear it in real time.
I can see how that would force you to pay attention to details you might otherwise miss. And the source has an analogy for why this works, right? Something about the gym.
It does. The guide states that shadowing is, and I quote, like training in the gym, but for your voice. And this is really crucial.
How so?
Well, speaking isn't just a mental activity, right? It involves physical muscles in your mouth, your tongue, your throat, even your diaphragm for breath control. Shadowing provides this intense, targeted practice for these muscles.
Like a workout.
Exactly. It helps them get used to the often unfamiliar movements and coordination required for native English sounds and rhythms. And at the same time, it sharpens your ear's ability to detect subtle differences between your speech and the model. And it improves your brain's ability to connect what it hears to what your mouth needs to do. It's building that muscle memory for fluency.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Train the ear with focused listening. Train the voice and mouth with active shadowing. So the guide then shifts focus a bit, moving towards vocabulary, is that right?
That's right, but it's not just about learning more words in general. The guide emphasizes learning the right kind of words specifically, the everyday expressions that native speakers actually use in conversation.
So moving beyond just textbook phrases.
Exactly. That's a key insight from the source. Knowing a word is one thing. Knowing how it fits naturally into conversational flow is, well, something else entirely. The guide really pushes learners to move beyond potentially stiff, formal phrasing and adopt the more idiomatic expressions that pepper daily dialogue.
And does the source give examples of this? Because that sounds useful, but maybe a bit abstract.
Oh, absolutely. It's very helpful here because it gives specific, concrete examples of these natural alternatives. For instance, it tackles a phrase like, "I agree." Perfectly correct, obviously.
Sure, everyone learns that.
Right. But it can sometimes sound a little formal or maybe even abrupt, depending on the context. So the source suggests that native speakers commonly use phrases like, "Totally."
Totally. Yeah, you hear that all the time.
Or "exactly." Or even something like, "I couldn't agree more." for stronger agreement.
Those definitely feel instantly more natural in, say, a casual chat or even semi-formal situations.
Totally.
Give that enthusiastic vibe. Exactly. It feels precise, and I couldn't agree more, shows really strong alignment. They each have a slightly different flavor.
They do, and they're far more common in many contexts than just a flat, I agree. The source offers another excellent set of examples for a phrase learners probably use constantly. I don't know.
Oh yeah, the go-to phrase. What alternatives does the source suggest for that one?
It lists several common ones, things like, I have no idea.
Okay, a bit stronger.
Or, I'm not sure, to be honest. Adding that to be honest softens it a bit, makes it sound more considered.
Right.
And then there's the wonderfully colloquial, beats me.
Beats me. Yeah, that's a
Type.
fantastic example. You probably wouldn't find that in a standard beginner's textbook, but it's absolutely part of everyday spoken English.
It really is. And the source underscores that consciously learning and then, crucially, integrating these specific types of alternatives is vital for sounding more authentic and less robotic.
So it's not just about knowing the meaning.
No, it's about using them in a way that aligns with native conversational patterns. This involves understanding not just the literal definition, but also the context, the tone, the level of formality these phrases carry. You probably wouldn't say beats me to your boss in a serious meeting,
Probably not.
but with a friend, perfectly natural. The guide implicitly suggests that gaining this contextual awareness is part of learning these phrases effectively.
That adds another layer, doesn't it? It's about cultural fluency almost as much as linguistic accuracy. Okay, so we have these positive techniques. Listening for flow, shadowing for pronunciation, learning natural phrases. But the guide also includes some warnings, right? What are the common pitfalls it highlights?
It does. The source is quite direct here, pointing out 3 significant mistakes that it says can really hinder a learner's progress towards sounding natural, even if they're otherwise quite good at English.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first one it tackles is the temptation to speak too fast.
Ah, yes. The classic misconception, faster equals more fluent.
Exactly that. The guide warns explicitly against this trap. It notes that many learners push themselves to speak at, like, a breakneck pace because they think that's how native speakers sound.
That's not quite right.
Not according to this source. It clarifies that native speech isn't simply fast. It's characterized more by its smoothness, its appropriate rhythm, and also the intelligent use of pauses for emphasis or thought. Trying to speak too quickly, especially before you've mastered things like connected speech, rhythm, and clear articulation, well, it can actually result in jumbled, difficult to understand speech.
Which paradoxically sounds less natural.
Precisely. It's like trying to sprint before you've really learned to walk gracefully, as you put it earlier. The movement isn't efficient or effective.
Okay, so avoid rushing the speed. What's the second pitfall?
The second caution relates to slang.
Ah, slang. Always tricky for learners. It feels like the key to sounding cool, but it's easy to get wrong.
The guide really captures that tension. It acknowledges that slang can be fun, it sounds appealing, dynamic, but it quickly adds the crucial caveat that it can sound unnatural if it's used inappropriately or just, way too much.
Does it give an example?
It does, a memorable one, if maybe a little over the top to make the point. It suggests picturing someone constantly saying, yo, bro, that's lit, in every single sentence.
Right, okay. That paints a picture. It highlights how context, frequency, and just the suitability of the slang are absolutely key. Using a little bit of appropriate slang at the right time might help you blend in.
Sure.
But overdoing it, or using slang that's outdated, or using it in the wrong social setting, can instantly signal that you're maybe trying too hard, or you haven't quite grasped the nuances of when and where to use it.
Absolutely. The source's implicit message here seems to be that naturalness with slang comes from deep exposure and really understanding its specific usage patterns, who uses it, when, with whom. It's not just about dropping trendy words randomly. It requires a pretty sophisticated level of cultural and social awareness, which, frankly, is hard-won.
Makes sense. Okay, and the third pitfall. This one feels maybe more fundamental.
It is, according to the guide, and it's something easily overlooked, the failure to practice speaking out loud.
Ah. So just listening isn't enough.
Not nearly enough. The source observes that while many learners spend hours on passive listening, watching shows, listening to podcasts, consuming all sorts of content, they don't allocate enough dedicated time to actively producing the language themselves. And the guide is really unequivocal on this point. If you don't physically practice speaking, your pronunciation simply will not improve significantly.
That feels intuitive when you frame it physically.
Yeah,
Listening trains your ear, helps you understand. But speaking trains your actual vocal apparatus, tongue position, loop shape, airflow, voice control.
exactly. To produce those sounds accurately and smoothly, they are distinct but totally complementary skills. You need both.
So how does the guide wrap up this section on mistakes?
It basically summarizes by reinforcing its core advice. Focus on achieving clear, smooth speech with good rhythm rather than just raw speed. Use slang thoughtfully and appropriately for the situation. And crucially, make speaking practice, actual out loud active practice, a non-negotiable part of your routine. It's that constant reminder that active production is the essential bridge between just understanding the language and actually sounding natural when you speak it.
Okay, so we've got the techniques, the vocabulary focus, the pitfalls to avoid. Does the guide go any deeper? Does it touch on, say, the cultural side of things?
It does, yes. Beyond these more concrete techniques and warnings, the guide also layers in a broader perspective.
Well,
It touches on the cultural significance of spoken English and highlights some other specific linguistic features that contribute to sounding native.
interesting. What does it say about the cultural significance?
Well, this section adds some fascinating depth. The source points out that in many English-speaking cultures, the way you communicate how you sound carries considerable weight, often beyond just the literal meaning of your words.
How so?
It specifically notes that people often make pretty quick judgments about your confidence level and also how friendly you seem, based significantly on your tone of voice and your pronunciation.
Wow, that's a powerful cultural insight. So
Yeah.
it's not just about conveying information accurately, it's about conveying personality traits almost, like warmth, confidence, hesitation, enthusiasm, all through your vocal delivery.
Exactly. And the source uses intonation as a prime example to illustrate this very point. It contrasts two different ways of saying a really common phrase, how are you?
Okay, how does it contrast them?
First, it describes saying it with a completely flat, almost robotic delivery, monotone. How are you?
Right.
The source notes that this sounds unnatural, potentially unengaging, or even cold to a native speaker. It just lacks life.
Hmm.
But then it contrasts this with saying, how are you? Using a more friendly, typically rising intonation towards the end. How are you?
Ah, that upward lift.
Yes. The guide states that this way sounds warm and natural. It immediately signals interest and openness.
That's a brilliant, simple illustration. It shows how intonation isn't just random musicality, it carries real social meaning. That friendly, rising tone signals interest, makes you seem approachable, while a flat tone could easily sound disinterested or maybe even suspicious in certain contexts.
Precisely. So the source is showing how mastering these pitch patterns is pretty essential for conveying the right feeling, the intended social message, not just the literal words.
It really reinforces that initial point from the guide about focusing on how native speakers speak, not just what they say.
It does. And beyond intonation, the source also draws attention to another specific feature that's very common, particularly in American English: reductions.
Reductions,
Right.
right? Those are those kind of squished together, simplified forms of words that happen all the time in casual, connected speech. We hear them constantly, but might not consciously register them.
Exactly. They're everywhere once you start listening for them. The source provides some classic high-frequency examples. It highlights how going to is very, very often reduced to gonna in everyday conversation.
Right. Like, I'm gonna grab lunch.
Yeah.
You rarely say, I am going to grab lunch, unless you're being very emphatic or formal.
Exactly. And another primary example the source uses is the reduction of want to down to wanna.
As in, do you want to see a movie later? Instead of the full, do you want to see a movie later?
Perfect example. And the source emphasizes that becoming aware of and eventually comfortable using these reductions is incredibly helpful because, in its words, it helps learners blend in more with native speakers.
So it connects back to that whole connected speech idea again.
It does. Reductions are really just a specific type of sound change that happens when words link together quickly and naturally in the flow of speech. They are an absolute hallmark of fluent, natural-sounding English. If you ignore them or consciously avoid them, your speech will likely always sound a little bit careful, maybe a bit unnatural or overly formal, even if your pronunciation of individual words is technically perfect.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So this whole section on cultural context and these specific linguistic features like intonation and reductions, it really broadens the picture, doesn't it?
It really does.
It shows that achieving that natural sound is this complex interplay. It's partly about mastering the pronunciation mechanics, like connected speech and reductions. It's partly about understanding the social role of things like intonation and tone.
Hmm.
And it's about practicing all these elements together until they become second nature.
Mm-hmm. And the guide's advice for this section essentially circles back to the beginning. Actively listen for and try to analyze these features, the tone, the rhythm, the specific intonation patterns, the common reductions in all the native speech you expose yourself to.
So it integrates the listening practice from the very first section with these more specific features discussed later in the guide. You're constantly training your ear for more complexity, not just basic comprehension.
Exactly. It's a layered approach.
Wow. Okay, this guide, as presented in the source outline we've been discussing, it offers a remarkably clear and really actionable path, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From that foundational listening and the active copying with shadowing, through choosing the right words, avoiding common errors, it seems to cover the essential ground pretty thoroughly.
It certainly seems like a very practical blueprint. It feels designed not just to inform you about these things, but actually to prompt you to take action. And in fact, the source outline itself apparently proposed a specific challenge task for anyone looking to apply these
Oh,
principles.
really? What kind of task?
It suggested a tangible three-step exercise directly linked to the techniques we've just discussed. First, it said, pick a short English audio source, a video clip, maybe a podcast segment, something manageable.
Okay.
Second, choose just one sentence from it and really commit to shadowing it, practicing that precise imitation technique, focusing on the sound, rhythm, everything.
One sentence, shadow it intensely.
Okay.
Got it. And the third step.
The third step was to take the vocabulary point and use it immediately. It suggested trying to use one new natural phrase, maybe one of those alternatives for I agree or I don't know that you've picked up from listening or from the guide's examples in a real conversation that very same day.
Well, I like that.
Yeah.
Immediate application.
Exactly. The source also apparently suggested that learners could maybe share who their favorite native speakers are to learn from, like actors, podcasters, whoever, sort of encouraging connection and sharing good resources among learners.
Those suggested tasks really drive home the point that this guide is all about application, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just theory. It's about consistent, focused practice turning into habit.
Absolutely. And the source outline even gave a little preview, mentioning that its next topic was going to be about practicing speaking alone, which is another interesting angle on fluency building it intended to cover. It shows the breadth of its approach.
Well, this deep dive into the sources outline has, I really hope, provided you, our listener, with a comprehensive look at the specific methods and the powerful insights it offers. You should now have a better handle on the core tools and the kind of awareness this guide highlights for taking your English towards that more natural native-like sound.
And these are definitely techniques, as the source emphasizes, that you can absolutely start applying today, right where you are. You don't need to move across the world.
Right. It empowers the learner.
It does. And reflecting on this guide, this blueprint we've unpacked, it leaves us with a final thought for you to perhaps carry forward. As you embark on, or maybe continue, your own learning journey, which specific aspect that this source focuses on really resonates with you? Is it mastering the nuts and bolts of connected speech and reductions? Is it the physical skill of shadowing? Is it consciously building that vocabulary of natural phrases? Or perhaps is it tuning into the cultural weight carried by intonation and tone? Which piece of this puzzle feels like the most significant challenge, or maybe the most exciting opportunity for your progress right now? What stands out most strongly to you from this guide?
That's a great question to reflect on. Definitely a lot to consider and maybe even more to practice. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into what seems like incredibly practical source material.
Our pleasure. Keep listening with intention, keep practicing out loud, and genuinely enjoy the rewarding process of developing your own unique, natural voice in English.